I feel like when there's this backstage to your life that you're not proud of, that feels chaotic, it feels messy, it feels misaligned with your deepest values and who you want to be and who you are, I feel like it kind of dams up the river, so to speak. And I think having a free flowing river really is connected to being able to show up, to let creativity flourish, to be able to be present and connect with others fully in conversations, even just energy, something as simple as like having energy to show up in the day.
Yeah.
When you're engaging in these behaviors that are creating so much shame and distancing yourself from others, I think it prevents that flow that makes it so that I'm more drained starting out when I show up to work the next day.
This is the Live, Lead, Last podcast.
Welcome to the Live, Lead, Last podcast, where we help you live with intention, lead with conviction, and leave a lasting legacy. I'm your host, James Duvall, and I'm so glad you're joining us for today's important conversation. Now, before we dive in, I want to invite you to take a step back so that you can move forward with a 5-day leadership reset. This is a free resource that I designed to help leaders like you recenter on what matters most, and in just 5 days, you'll gain clarity, reset rhythms, and reignite your purpose. It's bite-sized, practical, and impactful. You can start today at liveleadlast.com/reset. Now, today's episode goes beneath the surface. We're talking about a topic that's rarely addressed but profoundly affects leaders at every level. We're talking about pornography and compulsive sexual behavior. Research shows that over 90% of men and around 60% of women have viewed pornography at some point, and an estimated 1 in 5 internet searches is related to sexual content. Among adults, nearly 1 in 4 people report viewing porn weekly, and many begin regular exposure during adolescence, often before the age 13. Despite its prevalence, this issue remains hidden behind layers of shame and secrecy, especially in leadership circles. So our guest today is someone who's trying to change that. Chandler Rogers is the co-founder and CEO of Relay, a digital recovery startup helping individuals overcome pornography addiction through the power of community. His passion is personal. After walking his own road to recovery, Chandler recognized the real path of freedom isn't just behavior change, it's healing from the wounds beneath the surface. His leadership is rooted in integrity, vulnerability, and the belief that we grow stronger together. So if you've ever felt like the pressures of leadership are disconnecting you from your own emotional health, or if you're carrying a private battle that's starting to bleed into your public life, this episode is for you. So let's get into it. So Chandler, it's so great to have you on the podcast. Thanks for taking some time to be on the show today.
Well, so grateful to be here. Thanks, James.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk about your app and talk about what you're doing. But before we get there, I'd love just to hear a little bit about you and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah. So anytime I hear this question, I always immediately go to where I'm from. And I grew up moving around a lot. So it's always not an easy question to answer, but I went to high school in Washington State. My family currently lives in Arizona. I think I lived in 6 states growing up. So every 4 or 5 years, my dad would change jobs, and that would usually mean moving states to a new company. So I was the oldest of 5 kids and had 3 younger sisters, one younger brother. Moving around a lot growing up, I feel like I could, appreciate the variety in terms of the people that I was friends with. So I enjoyed sports growing up, but I also enjoyed music, and I really loved to learn and found that, school was just really fun for me. So I felt like as we moved around, as I had to reinvent myself, growing up, I just enjoyed getting to meet different types of people, have different groups of friends. And so I ended up leaving the house, going to serve a 2-year mission for our church in New York City.
Okay.
And then after that, came to Salt Lake City, Utah, where I did school here. And I graduated in business strategy. And that's also where I started my company, Relay, which I assume we'll get more into later.
That's awesome. I know your journey, actually, the start of Relay comes from your own personal journey. And, you've been open on other shows and about the start of Relay coming from your own journey with pornography addiction. So I'd love for you to share a little bit of that journey. I know it started in high school. Can you walk us through the initial moment of recognition that it wasn't just something of curiosity, but it was actually something that was a lot more serious?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I grew up as the oldest of 5 kids. I felt this maybe perception from, I guess, expectations at home to be a good kid. I don't know how else to put it. Like we were a Christian family, and I think my parents also, just from an academic standpoint, I think really pushed excellence there in sports too. So I felt maybe a part external, part internal pressure to perform, to be, a high achiever in all these areas of my life. Pornography was something that we had talked about. I knew, the message I'd received from church or from home was like, this is a, bad thing. You might come across it, stay away from it. Didn't really know what that meant, right? I was like, not really sure what they're talking about. And, as I was in high school, kind of gradually was getting introduced to social media and Instagram, and that was becoming popular at the time. And those platforms were less moderated back then as well, in terms of kind of the automatic filtering for sexualized content. And so I wasn't looking, for anything. It just kind of happened upon me, as I was getting older and getting online more. And I don't think I really knew what to do, at first. I don't think I realized that this was what I had been told was the thing to stay away from, or that might, be bad for me. And so I think curiosity, right, and exploring my, my own body changing at the time. I have a health condition called Crohn's disease. So I actually didn't really grow a whole lot. I was small, like 80 pounds, I think, when I was a freshman in high school, and like 5'1". And I think there was maybe a part of that perception too, of like, when's my body going to grow? And like, I'm kind of curious to, understand that. And then all of a sudden, this combination with like this whirlwind of sexualized content on Instagram that I wasn't really expecting or prepared to handle, kind of all combined. And before I knew it, I think a habit had been developing. And I think the realization was, oh crap, I wanted to try to stop, but I could sense internally just this pull, this tug to keep going back because it felt good. And that was an interesting moment where I realized some sense of powerlessness. Like I don't actually want to be engaging in these behaviors, but the more I became aware of that, the harder it was to stop.
Yeah. So when was it for you that you realized that, you couldn't stop? So what was it, the trigger that kind of went, I need help to do this. I need to get in the community, or I need to find somebody else to fight this battle with me besides just myself?
Yeah. I think a couple of years had passed, and it was just the cycle over and over, and it getting worse and worse, and realizing, I think, just the level of feeling out of control and feeling like every other area in my life on the outside feels put together. Maybe people see me as put together, but on the inside, feeling totally powerless and like things are falling apart, which I know you touched on this in general. This isn't an addiction thing. This is like, many leaders, many people feel that way, where on the outside we're perceived as one way, or our life looks a certain way, but inside it feels more and more chaotic. And so I think it was my senior year of high school. I was turning 18 and kind of felt like, I know that this isn't working to try to do it alone, because it, every new start of the month or new start of the year, or every birthday was like a new chance of like, okay, now I'm going to like figure this out, going to just try harder. But that hadn't been working. And so it was just enough of that like cycle and feeling like totally beat down that I was like open to something else. And I'd come across a therapist-led group that was an online thing for young adult men. And I was like very open to the idea, actually. Like, I think a part of me was like, hesitant because I hadn't really talked about it with anybody, but I think I just felt such a sense of like, I want my perception of myself to be that I am in control, and I don't feel that way. So I'm willing to put myself in that group environment. So I did. And I think that was where things did start to change for me.
Do you find that pornography addiction is different to be vulnerable about compared to like alcohol addiction or drug addiction, some of those other addictions?
I think, I've got a problem with alcohol. For one, it's more visible. Like my drinking happens probably, in the open to some extent. I think it's a lot less stigmatized to say, hey, I'm trying to cut back on alcohol, right? Versus to say like, hey friends, I'm trying to cut back on porn. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
But it's so prevalent. It's so common. And I think that the difference, with pornography and sexual addiction is how the shame festers because of the isolation, and how not easy it is to talk about, especially I would say for men who are more high performing or generally have their life together, and at least to some extent, to feel some degree of like secret, out of control behavior that maybe doesn't seem bad at first. Maybe it is innocent, but then eventually it becomes more and more invasive and takes over everything. And as we, built Relay the last 5 years, I've now worked with thousands of men who've been through this journey. And it's interesting to see how it's not always a morality thing of like, I felt like porn was wrong because of my beliefs or what I was taught, but it was more of like at a certain point, it started to really erode the mental health, my ability to have a real relationship with somebody romantically, to feel good about myself, all the time loss. So it's just interesting, how difficult it is to talk about.
I heard you say before that it's not porn problem, it's a pain problem.
Yeah.
Right? That people are trying to numb themselves from the pain in their life and so forth, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was a multi-year process gaining awareness on like what pain. I felt like I had a good life. I felt like, what I was given in my upbringing from my family relationships and everything that was given to me was generally like a good life with not a whole lot to complain about. And I still think that that's true, but I think learning to understand and examine, where are the ways that I wasn't necessarily in touch with my emotional needs? Like where are the ways that I did felt rejected in small ways or disconnected or not fully accepted or not fully seen, not fully appreciated, and no one else's fault, but just the way that, internally I perceived certain experiences, not even big things, right? Those little things add up and create emotional pain. And this, again, is not an addiction thing. It's not even a porn thing. I think it's a human thing where we all experience brokenness in our relationships, in our lives. And we tend to turn towards these coping behaviors that make us feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested, since this is your business, we're going to talk about Relay here in a second, but obviously you had to look at the total addressable market and, the need for an app in this area. So talk to us about the scope of this issue, because it's not, I think for a long time it was a guy issue, but from what I hear and what I understand, it's becoming more even of a female issue dealing with this. So talk about the scope of it, specifically, among high achievers, professionals, and leaders that you're seeing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different studies that have been published, even just in the last 5 years, 10 years. And really just the summary is that there are millions of people that deal with this, and that it's a lot more common than almost every other addiction. And it's likely underreported. So if you think about the nature of these surveys, how many people are like raising their hand honestly and saying, this is a problem I have, or this is something I engage in regularly, it's likely to be underreported. And so what I've seen, in the last 5 years of being, I guess, very open with my own story, more anecdotally, it feels more in the ballpark of 1 out of every 2 or 1 out of every 3 guys that I've interacted with. It tends to be about that, actively dealing with some degree and some level of awareness. Because I think some people are like, maybe I dabble with that every now and then, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal, right? And other people are like, struggle with this since I was 11. I've been married for 30 years now, and it's completely eating me up from the inside, and it's affecting our relationship and everything. And with women, can't remember the exact latest statistics, but it is more common. And I think we need to be careful to, not just make this a men's issue, because we've seen lots of groups in Relay for women who are dealing with compulsive sexual behavior, and they felt like they were literally the only ones. And the shame that they felt was like so high. But luckily, I think that's changing a little bit. And unfortunately, I think the numbers only continue to get worse with things like AI and just the proliferation of TikTok and Instagram and just social media at large, is meaning that kids earlier and earlier are getting traps. That's the sad part as well. The brain is still developing in those early ages. Most kids are getting exposed. So you can kind of do some back of the napkin math to estimate what percentage are in their teenage years and young adult years developing a regular habit and eventually addiction with pornography that ends up taking a toll over time.
Yeah. I feel like one of the things is that there's a lot of misconceptions about pornography or viewing sexual content and so forth. And I think it probably is different than alcoholism or other addictions because it is so mental, right? Like, you get drunk, it wears off, you're going to get another fix, but your brain doesn't forget images, right? Your brain doesn't forget those experiences. So with those misconceptions in mind, what are some other things that you find with leaders about pornography that maybe they don't understand the effects that actually can have them as an individual?
Well, yeah, maybe the other thing to mention with high achieving men, leaders, again, not just men, but those who are in positions of leadership or have successful, quote unquote, like lives or have succeeded in some areas of their lives. I think what we've observed is that there's a high degree of isolation naturally for leaders. Not just about pornography, just in general. And when we say that this isn't really about pornography, it's about pain and emotional pain, isolation and disconnects are really the underlying needs not being met. It's why when I turn to porn as opposed to alcohol, I'm really looking for some connection. I want to feel seen. I want to feel loved, in the deepest sense. I think that is sexuality, is to feel seen and known and loved fully. And that is both emotional and physical. Pornography is a cheap imitation of that. And so I think for high achievers or leaders in these positions where they're giving so much to others or they're working so hard, right, at whatever they're doing, whether it's your own business or whatever path you've chosen, I think it creates this like deeper disconnect of emotional pain where, not feeling fully seen and understood by others because no one really understands what it's like to be me. I've felt that a ton, even in the last 5 years being an entrepreneur and CEO, trying to help other people with this, feeling like this extra layer of like my life does feel tough, like trying to help others, trying to lead and to create a lasting impact and a legacy. It tends to have this double-edged sword of feeling even more isolated and alone. And I think that does tend to drive people towards sexual acting out to cope with that.
Yeah. Okay. So take us back to high school, the aha moment when you started thinking about some sort of application or some sort of tool. Tell us about the genesis story of Relay.
Yeah. Well, high school is where I think I became aware of my own problem, but it was later in college where I realized maybe there could be an app that could help and a technology platform. So I had, I guess, the question that every college student asks themselves is, what am I going to do with my life? Yeah. What career path am I going to end up going down? And what do I want to study? And I was leaning towards business. I was very interested in tech in general. So I had worked at a startup in a totally different space in the moving industry, which was kind of fitting for me, having moved around quite a bit growing up. Yeah. And it was at that same time, I was also learning to code a little bit. And I had a class specifically where the prompt was to build any app that you want and you'll get credit for the class. And I pitched my friend on the idea for Relay. Over this whole time, I'd been going to recovery groups and working on my own healing. And so I shared with him. I was like, hey man, probably something that you haven't talked to a lot of people about, or we haven't talked about, I know. So pornography addiction, I think a lot of people deal with this alone. And the barrier to get access to a good, healthy support system, to good accountability is very difficult. What if we built an app that made that easier? And he was like, that is an interesting idea. Let's do it. And so it started in that class and quickly we realized we had an opportunity to, is this just a school project or is this something we really care about and want to build a real product and a real platform to actually help people? And he had a job offer to go work at Apple. And I had a different job offer lined up. This is our senior year of college. And we had gotten a few hundred people using the app. Like we quickly built like an early version of it, which there's a lot of fun, like entrepreneurship stories there in and of itself. But we were faced with this question of people were liking it and they were actually finding it helpful. They were getting real accountability for the first time. They were stepping out of shame and feeling seen for the first time. And it was a lot less scary and less awkward than going to some like church basement for a 12-step group. And I've been to 12-step groups and they're good for what they are. But again, lowering the barriers through an app, I think immediately we saw great feedback. And so we then had the choice of like, let's keep this going. Let's try to grow this and try to help people as much as we can.
Did you initially start as like a freemium version of it, or was it a paid version, or was it?
Well, it was totally free at the beginning just because we were scared to ask anything for it. Because we were like, this is crappy. We only learned to code like 2 months ago as we were building this out. Like I remember we were building out the group chat side of Relay because we matched people into these small private groups. And I was like Googling how to even build like a live streaming chat function from an engineering perspective. Again, I was not an engineer background. So I was like literally trying to figure out how to even architect this type of thing technically. But yeah, no, it was interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you talk us through the app? Tell us about its functionality, the underpinnings of how it works. And
Yeah. So if I'm struggling, most people who come into Relay have dealt with this for decades. So it's been a problem that's been on their mind, but it's been in secret. They haven't been able to share with anybody or find help. So they come in, we ask some questions and are able to match them with a private group of 7 or 8 other people. So I mentioned we do have groups for men and then groups for women if they're struggling. And then once I get into the platform, into the group, we have a few different tools to help them focus not just on tracking, did I slip up today or not, but to try to get more in tune and aware of the emotions and the stressors that are maybe leading them towards acting out in the first place. And so we collaborated with some therapists to build out like a whole curriculum. So there's daily, 2 to 3 minute videos that will teach me principles to help understand the brain better, help understand where did this all start. So we actually have people really do a deep dive and study kind of their own family system and the dynamics growing up to understand, where did I maybe not learn to get my needs fully met? And how does that relate to my behaviors? And so as they're going through Relay, they kind of have this group and they have a way to check in every day. I think the biggest thing for most people is it makes it a lot easier when I am struggling to reach out because it's just like one tap away. We help them like be able to log that urge and to process it and to throw a red flag into the group. And so there's a ton of great stories we've heard of people who normally, would feel tempted when they're alone at night after a long day at work, but now they have, just a very easy way to, reach out to a group who's not going to judge them because they're all in the same boat together. And I think most people are also surprised at how not weird that is. Like most of the other people in these groups are also like very normal, so to speak, and have, goals and they have families and they have, like these are good people. And
these
so
are
we're trying to help them step out of that shame and community and connection is really the whole heart of everything that Relay does for people.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not deviants on there. They're just people who are really struggling to find wholeness, right?
When I stepped into my first group, I was like, are these going to be like creepy pedophile like dudes on the other end of this call? And I realized like I was looking at the other 10 guys on the call. I'm like, these are all very cool, like normal people who I would never guess would struggle with this. And I think that was a reflection of my own shame and viewing myself as like, clearly, I shouldn't be struggling with this, but that's just not true. I think we all are all human.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I think that's good for people who are listening. You're in the car, in your office or whatever. It's like, this is a real struggle for people. Like, and because we live in an over-sexualized culture now where you can't turn on TV, you can't go to the internet, you can't go on social media without sexual activity being, jammed down your throat. It's hard to deal with this kind of addiction, And so I think an app like Relay is so powerful for accountability to know that, hey, there's other people that are normal people just trying to go about life to find wholeness and healing. I'm interested in what's different about Relay compared to maybe some other accountability apps and tools that are out there on the market.
Yeah. I mean, I do think the group focus is what draws most people in that feels different. Like I can go, get a blocker on my phone or on my home computer that filters the internet that makes it harder to access pornography. I can go get other apps that I can track, my habits, and there's a bajillion of those. Really, and what we've tried to do different with it is create a very tight-knit group environment that integrates the tracking, that integrates the therapeutic learning in an environment that is very focused on doing this together and not just trying to put a Band-Aid on like preventing access to pornography, but trying to treat what is the underlying wound? What am I really running from?
Mm-hmm.
And to try to help not just get through the pornography habit, but to become healthier, more whole individuals like that. I think that focus as we've collaborated with our therapist partners, I think is what a lot of people find, they were expecting maybe just an app that would help them track some stuff and maybe a little community forum. They're like, oh no, this is like a real roadmap that's going to help me not just manage these behaviors better, but learn how to develop and to grow out of, these past coping mechanisms. But what I'm actually gaining is the skills and the support to show up better in my relationships, to show up better at work, to show up more fully as a leader, to have more confidence and have better mental health. And so I think those things are really what we're focused on. And I think that is something that a lot of other apps and tools out there, maybe like, here's how to just quit your addiction in 90 days. We want to go beyond that. help people develop and grow.
That's awesome. Yeah, you're talking about those things that are under the surface, those, our experiences and environments we've grown up in that kind of shape, the things that nobody sees. And you really, the addiction piece is really the outward expression of, what those things are underneath. And so to be able to walk through and help people understand those tendencies that break those patterns are really great. I have a good friend, Lance Witt, who talks about the front stage and the backstage of leadership. And a lot of times that we present ourselves as a certain way, but behind the stage, if there's not help, ultimately it's going to come out and affect our front stage, our platform, or our influence with other people. So I love that fact that you're dealing with that backstage piece of the underside of our life that nobody really sees, and dealing with that pieces. So, so for people who are listening today that may, be struggling in this area, how can they jump on the relay? If it sounds like something they need, what's the best way for them to get started?
Yeah. I mean, we try to make it really low barrier. Like, you don't have to talk to anybody. It's not like the commitment of jumping into something like therapy, but you can just go to our website, which is www.joinrelay.app. And from there, it walks you through a little intake assessment where you just fill out some questions anonymously about, your situation. And we really, again, it's not poking and prodding into the details of your struggle, but more like trying to help understand where you're at and why, this is something that you want to change and get help with. And it takes 5 to 10 minutes, and we get you into a group. And also I would say, we give everyone a free trial, because I know for me personally, and the majority of the people I talk to, they've struggled with this long enough that they've tried a lot of things, and they feel kind of discouraged on I don't know if anything can really ever work for me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'll really ever be able to get past this. And I deeply empathize with that, because I've been there, for many years. And so we really just want people to be in Relay long enough to be able to try it. And I don't promise anybody that it's a magic bullet, but to have the combination of all of that support with a community, I think for most people just makes a huge difference. So yeah, they can go to the website. You can just get started and just try it.
Awesome.
For free.
Awesome. And you've been generous to give us a code for our listeners at LIVE20, LIVE 20, and you get 20% off. And so I'll put that link in the show notes and that code in the show notes as well. So I really appreciate that. Let's talk a little bit about just the practicalities of, again, going back to pornography affecting leadership, because a lot of people listening to this episode are business leaders or entrepreneurs like yourself. They're creators. I've heard you talk about the shame cycle that sometimes happens with leaders. Can you talk about how the shame cycle with pornography specifically affects things like decision making, creativity, the ability to be present with your team?
Yeah. Just like a rough analogy that's come to my head before this is kind of like a river and a dam. I feel like when there's this backstage to your life that you're not proud of, that feels chaotic, it feels messy, it feels misaligned with your deepest values and who you want to be and who you are, I feel like it kind of dams up the river, so to speak. And I think having a free-flowing river really is connected to being able to show up, to let creativity flourish, to be able to be present and connect with others fully in conversations, even just energy, something as simple as having energy to show up in the day.
Yeah.
When you're engaging in these behaviors that are creating so much shame and distancing yourself from others, that I think it prevents that flow that makes it so that I'm more drained starting out when I show up to work the next day. Even just very practically, I can't tell you the number of guys that have talked to me saying, I was awake, until 3 a.m. last night acting out. And yeah, how does that going to impact me when I show up at 8 o'clock the next morning? Dude, I'm already dead from the beginning. And it's not just because of the lack of sleep, but because of how it's affecting my mind. Like that river's already dried up. So I don't have enough to give to pour into my team or to my projects or to my passion. But that's, I think, a clear why for me on as I was trying to figure out why I want to actually change this. Why is it really a problem for me? I want to be able to have, a powerful current, if you will, that I can pour into what I really care about, to purpose and to passion. But if it's being sucked away, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. Hey friends, I want to take a quick break to tell you about something that's become a real part of my rhythm lately, my Titan cold plunge system. I've got the Bravo tank paired with the 1/3 horsepower chiller, and I've been using it consistently for the past few weeks. I was looking for an affordable, no-hassle cold plunge solution, something that didn't require me to keep dumping bags of ice just to stay consistent. And this system absolutely delivered. The water stays cold without any fuss, and the build quality is rock solid. But more than that, it's been a huge boost to my mental clarity, energy, recovery, and overall well-being. As a leader and entrepreneur, I'm always trying to stay sharp and present. Titan has helped me do that. So if you've been curious about cold plunging or want a more reliable setup that actually lasts, check out Titan Cold Plunge Systems with a link in the show notes. I'm sure over the 5 years, you've had stories of people who have been on your platform that have found real breakthrough or recovery, maybe even from your own journey of just recovery and in leadership. What are some stories that you've heard of people how this journey has really affected them?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard so many. Maybe I'll give one work example and one home example in the family. Great. So two guys that I know very well in our community. One is a C-suite level executive leader at a public company that I won't name, but so a very high profile executive. And, you know, I don't know how many people he oversees and manages, but it's a lot in their organization. And he felt like this problem had come to such a pinnacle over a 20-year period that he was so depressed. So like, he's used like very extreme verbiage. I can't remember exactly the way he put it, but like basically felt like his brain was withered and dead from years of sexual acting out, getting worse and worse. And his marriage was on the rocks when this came out. And his ability to show up at work and to be present and lead, he said like he viewed himself as arrogant, viewed himself as prideful, like the ways he compensated to still show up were kind of ugly in his own like self-reflection. Like he had to find a way to show up in that type of position. He couldn't just show up and be tired or show up and be, you know, less than what is demanded as a C-suite executive. But, you know, he just wasn't, I think, the type of character that he really wanted to be. And it sounds like he's not a super fun person to be around. And I'm so proud of like his work and how he showed up. So he now has, I want to say close to 1.5 years of sobriety. So he's been in our community for over 1 year. And in like his transformation, it has been like huge. And I know he feels so much happier at work, and that people tell him that he's just like a totally different boss, totally different manager. And so that's like one very practical story from someone fairly high profile. Awesome. Another guy I know he has kids who are in college and high school, and this problem had been going on through their entire marriage, through his all the years that his kids were growing up. They have 4 kids. And I think the transformation I've seen in him more than anything is the way that he's able to show up and be a different father for those kids. You know, as they're starting to leave the house and go to college, this is kind of a little bit of my interpretation as I've become friends with this guy. I just can't help but think about and imagine what like his oldest son in college is seeing from his vantage point as he looks at his dad, who's putting in so much work to just be a healthier person. Again, and not just about his sobriety from pornography addiction, but the work that he's showing up to be more vulnerable, to understand his own emotions better, to be more in tune and present in their family. Like, I just think about those kids and the type of father that they're getting through his own transformation. And I know that just from what he's shared, that their family has like been blessed by that.
Yeah. I think as you're talking through that, I'm reminded that we can only give what we possess, right? And as leaders. And one of the things that we talk about when I'm coaching leaders is, you know, to be 100% healthy and able to multiply that in other people. And if your personal health, and, you know, that's not just your physical health, but it's your emotional, your spiritual, or relational health is diminished, you can't show up 100% in any place. So you may have it all together physically, you may have it all together, you know, whatever, but there's this undercurrent of unhealth. It's going to show up in every area, parenting, your marriage, your workspace, right?
Yeah. The interesting thing about that though is I think that even if we're putting in the work to get 100% healthy, we'll continue to have setbacks and have imperfections where, you know, that meter dips. And this is my beliefs that I think when we continuously can kind of notice that and focus on, I guess, just a general commitment to betterments and to owning owning that difference where I am falling short, where my health isn't enough for what I actually need to show up and be who I want to be. Owning that repeatedly and continuing to try to get better and realizing that it's not just going to stay at 100% all the time. I think that builds trust. I think that instills a lot of confidence with people who are in relationships with us, whether it's loved ones or those that we work with. I know that for me personally, that it was less about how many days I'd been clean that made my wife feel confident, but more about her seeing that I was still committed always to looking for ways to get more whole and more healthy.
Yeah.
I think, as I was listening to stuff like this or podcasts, I'm like sometimes intimidated by like, I don't know if I can get my crap together that much, but I guess the message that I'm trying to say is like, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's about to own it, right? To keep showing up.
Well, perfection's never going to happen, right? None of us are going to be perfect. And I love, how Dan Sullivan, Ben Hardy in their book, The Gap and the Gain, talk about that, if we measure against perfection, we're always going to, come up as failures because the horizon's constantly moving. And as we get stronger, in whatever area, so if somebody's in recovery and they're getting more healthy, the ideal vision of themselves is going to also expand and grow. So they talk about, not measuring that gap between where you are and where you want to be, but measuring the gain of where you are and from where you've come. And I think, your wife, team members on staff and so forth, I think they value authenticity and they value commitment. They value effort to realize that, hey, I'm a, flawed human being and I have, I'm never going to be perfect, but I am working towards becoming healthy, right?
Love that. Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about applications for Relay. And I know that, as an individual, I can go on and I can jump onto your platform, but you also have an ability for therapists to actually use this as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some therapists that have groups and this was like what I started out in, we met on, I think it was Wednesday nights over Zoom, but then the other 6 days of the week, we kind of were on our own in a way. I think we had like a group me chat to try to stay connected, but that was actually a focus early on is, could we help therapist groups that already have, or there's also local men's groups, maybe at churches or any other type of format that, people that I do happen to have in my support circle, can we use this as almost a platform to help enrich and enhance that structure and that support the other 6 days of the week? So yeah, we have lots of therapists that, are using Relay in that way.
Yeah. I'm wondering with the sense of leadership and, think about your C-suite friend that, really struggled in the workplace due to what was going on in his personal life. Do you see any place that organizations or businesses could, begin to have more open dialogue about this issue, maybe even using a tool like Relay to support, the health and well-being of their teams?
Yeah. I mean, you're asking me kind of a little bit of a business moonshot question of, is there a way that this is kind of a wellness benefit for corporations, right? We've seen a lot of improvement there in general with like mental health and wellness benefits and companies partnering with companies that are trying to fulfill that need. Company I worked at for a while, it's like, I could get telehealth like therapy visits kind of as part of our benefits. I think that something again, like sexual addiction and pornography is just so much less talked about. But from everything we see in our community with the hunters and just the groups that we're running with all these guys and women, they feel like this issue is the number one thing that's impacting their productivity, their mental health at work and at home. And so I think if companies and leaders want to be kind of at the forefront of understanding how to support overall health and wellness for their employees, I think it is seriously worth trying to move past the stigma and understanding why this issue is so prevalent and affects so many relationships, especially. So anybody that's married or in a relationship, I've wanted to actually do a study, James, to understand like our own data, how prevalent this is, because I feel like some degree of infidelity or like sexual betrayal happens in so many relationships, but even for those who are single, like it's just very common. And so if the way that these people are internalizing it is like, I feel like this thing is eating away at my life. Yeah, I think absolutely corporations and organizations that are in a position to help connect people with resources, I think it should be a conversation.
Yeah. I think
looking good, by the way. I'm very willing to hop on a call and talk with you about that. If this is your organization that you want to, explore, if there's a way to partner for sure. Like I'm just very open-minded to like, how do we just help more people in whatever way that looks like?
I've been in the church space for 30 years, and I don't know how many conversations that I've had with team members, leaders who have been disqualified or have, been taken out of their, assignment and calling because of sexual addiction, specifically with pornography, that from a health and well-being, spiritual side, from a church perspective, it feels like, a tool like this would be so easy to implement into, a wellness plan with an insurance company or so forth, that specifically with, every company, but I'm thinking like religious organizations, spiritual organizations, where this is kind of a thing that would derail the young leader from moving forward. Seems like such a no-brainer to me. And so,
especially when those dynamics exist where those individuals struggling because they're in that, position feel especially trapped. I think from what I've seen, I don't feel like I can be transparent about this, but yeah, I'm probably very desperately trying to work at this inside. Yeah, I think making it easier for those people to get help.
Yeah. And I do think that, going back to this idea of isolation that happens in leadership, and I think probably even more amplified in the last 4 or 5 years coming out of COVID, where everybody was isolated so much that, and just the technology and again, the barrage of content that, back when I was a kid, I'm a little bit older than you, quite a bit older than you, but back when I was a kid, you actually had to, people who had pornography addictions, they actually had to go someplace and buy something or make a phone call or whatever, where now you don't even have to look for it. You pick up your phone. If you're not on guard, what used to be hardcore pornography is now softcore, just on regular TV shows and so forth. So it is such an issue for anybody that's, if they're not on guard, and so I think, providing a resource like what Relay does with corporations or churches or, other institutions as a wellness thing would be very beneficial.
There. No, for sure.
So I'd love to know just a little bit about the signs that, if you think about this idea in organizations a little bit, what are some signs that leaders should be looking for in people that are on their teams, that there might be some addiction issues?
This is a loaded question. It's interesting because I feel like so much of what we accept as normal are actually signs that somebody might be struggling. Like maybe I'll give an example. The guy who I talked about in the C-suite position, the way that he, I guess, externalized the struggles and the issues he was having over the years, maybe looks like a very outgoing, maybe attention-seeking guy, right? I think he described himself as like the life of the party, but maybe kind of a loud, sarcastic, like using humor to kind of like, I think, to get attention, right? And to probably make himself feel good as a way to compensate with how he's really feeling on the inside. Now, I don't think that means anyone who has like X, Y, and Z character traits is struggling, but I think just being aware that like when there are these hidden issues that are going on in someone's personal life and their marriage, like the way that these things are externalized, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily functioning less on the outside. But again, I think a lot of people who are very high functioning, very high achieving, they need into the point of overworking and burning out, right? Or even, being addicted to work and being driven by that, some sort of like, I guess, having needs fulfilled in that way.
A stimulus or something
can
that
be an
keep them
indication,
going, right?
Can be an indication that there's maybe some lopsided, reciprocal thing going on where there's needs not being met somewhere else. And so you can almost, infer that there's likely some degree of behavioral coping going on. And, this doesn't always look like pornography. I think a lot of people, maybe the typical American, getting home from work, it's to grab a beer, to kick back on the couch, and just watch some TV and, just veg for a few hours because, man, I've been on all day. I just need to rest. Or, I know my wife's amazing. We have a toddler at home and I know she just feels like at the end of the day, all she wants to do is just like be alone on her phone, for a second. And that's not to say that that's inherently bad. But I think that these patterns are like, yeah, when we are overextending or having our needs not met, or we're being drained in one area, it's likely going to point, our brain is going to seek some relief from that discomfort. It wants to escape that pain. So James, I know it's not probably very practical for leaders listening to this, but I think just being aware that likely, even the people that seem the most, outwardly healthy and effective on their teams, there's a decent chance that they've got stuff, under the surface, backstage going on.
Right. And again, I think that's where as leaders with our teams, with organizations, and not, being nosy or prying, but if you can make the issue more transparent in the sense of being able to make it more open to talk about, like it's not some taboo, deviant thing that, only perverts have this issue with pornography, that again, in the world we live in, that it is so prevalent. And I think, and I love, the fact that Relay actually provides this opportunity for guys and ladies to be in community to discuss it. But I personally feel like until it becomes, more openly, not celebrated but talked about, like this is a real issue and not something that we kind of keep secret, a lot of people are going to stay, suffering in silence and in isolation.
Yeah. And I have to imagine, some organizations and people maybe feel like it's not my responsibility to pry into someone's personal life that way. But I think we all want to feel connected in relationships. We all want to feel loved. We all I think at its core, it goes back to the common emotional needs we have as humans that need to be met. And if we can create safe environments that allow us to check in and to know how the people that we care about or that are in our stewardship or in our, teams, how they're really doing, if we can discern and also create safety where they can feel comfortable to give us, even give us clues to how they're doing on those deeper emotional needs and those layers, that can help us better understand, how to help for sure.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay. A few last questions here for you. So still talking on leaders, and we talked a lot about leaders, but there might be somebody listening today or who's going to hear this message that feels like they're too far gone. Like they are in it. Like they don't know, there's any help for them, that they've been trapped in this since they were a kid and you're 20, 30 years into it. What's your message to them?
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you feel like you've been stuck and trapped and that you've tried, as hard as you possibly can, or you feel like your life is at such a mess that this doesn't feel redeemable. I personally have seen many people who do feel that way. And I've seen those people find hope again. I think it helps to not just think about what are my prospects for fixing everything, but to think about, are there little shifts that could help maybe give me a path forward, at least to give me some more confidence that maybe there are at least steps that can move me closer in the right direction, and to not get so fixated if you're, in the base of a bunch of mountains, looking up at the peak and thinking that feels impossibly far away, but to just look at the path in front of you and say, I can just get to this next point. I can take next 5 steps. Yeah. I think if it's any comfort, I think so many people do feel that way. They feel like they are the exception. And from my vantage point, when I've seen this enough, it almost feels like maybe invalidating that I'll sometimes tell guys, your story actually isn't unique.
Yeah.
And I think there can be some comfort in that. You might feel uniquely broken, uniquely stuck. And I have felt this personally for myself too. Yeah, but I also have this other factor, in my story, in my life, or my current situation that makes it different. With all due respect, I promise that it's not that different. And I promise that even if the peak feels far away, you can take a step forward, and you don't have to feel hope to do that. It doesn't have to feel.
That's awesome.
You don't have to feel lucky to move forward.
That's amazing. Okay. Last question for you. What would high school, 16, 17-year-old Chandler think about where current day Chandler is today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this question is kind of hard because at the time we're recording this, I just came off of a trip being out of the country for a few weeks, and I was really hoping to come back from this trip feeling more rejuvenated and refreshed. I've been pushing really hard as an entrepreneur, and I mentioned I have a toddler. So like even just kind of figuring out how to balance just everything in my life, I still feel woefully inadequate most of the time. And man, I came back from this trip just feeling even more burnt out, even more tired, just like it was exhausting. Before this interview, I've been feeling this sense of like, just tired and like, can I keep moving forward? I know people are getting help from this thing I'm doing with Relay. I feel like grateful for my life, but I don't know, just like the flame for me personally coming off of like this burnout, just being totally vulnerable right now has been really kind of consuming me. And my mental state hasn't been, I think, super great this last week because of that. I think 16-year-old me would probably give some just gentle reassurance, maybe put the arm around my shoulder and say, like, look, man, you're probably doing a lot better than you think. Look at all these people that because you've chosen to be open about your own struggle, your own story, there's at least these families and these people that, are finding healing. I think that would probably be the advice to myself, or the encouragement of you're already way, further along than you think. Whereas my current self actually looks at it and says, well, to get to this next level as a startup, as a leader, like, man, it feels like a big jump. And I feel like I don't know how we're going to do that, but I probably forget how far I've already come. And that would probably be a lot easier to see from my younger self for sure.
That's awesome, man. Thank you for your vulnerability. That's incredible. Yeah. You're obviously making a huge impact, and just want to encourage you to keep going, stay at it. I know that you've been at the tech space a lot longer than I have. I know it can be draining and frustrating at times and discouraging, but thousands of people have found hope and encouragement through what you're doing. So keep it up, man.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having the conversation with me. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks for being on the show today. I want to thank Chandler for that powerful conversation. And if you're a leader who's silently struggling, or if someone you care about is, know this: you're not alone, and help is within reach. Relay is providing a lifeline for thousands of people who want to step out of the shame and into healing through meaningful community and daily support. You can find all the links that we discussed in the show notes, including access to Relay. As a Live Lead Last listener, Chandler has generously offered 20% off your subscription. Just use the code LIVE20, LIVE20, when you sign up. You'll also want to check out our weekly email, Rooted. It's a quick dose of clarity and leadership insight to help you stay grounded in your calling. You can sign up by texting GROW, GROW, to 66866. And finally, if this episode resonated with you, would you take a moment to rate and review the podcast? Share it with someone who needs encouragement or is navigating the quiet battles of leadership. I'd also love to connect with you on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your story and keep the conversation going. Until next time, live with intention, lead with integrity, and never settle for less than lasting impact.